Cat Nation. Today we have two really cool people. We have from a channel called Lev and Jules. It's Lev and Jules. Lev and Jules, welcome to Det Nation. It's a great pleasure to have you here. You guys have a really cool YouTube channel. I really like it. Great animations, great conversation. It's really exciting. So I thought I'd have you on because I wanted to find out more about you guys because you're doing such fantastic work. So welcome to Det Nation, Lev and Jules.
Thank you so much, Steele. It's a pleasure to be here.
And you're coming all the way from Manhattan. What's the weather like there? What's it like to grow up in the Big Apple?
It is hot. Right now it is sweltering. It was 100 degrees yesterday. Lev, how would you describe the weather?
I would describe the weather as going to one of my favorite locations, the Russian Turkish baths on 10th Street in Manhattan. It's just like being in the bathhouse, except I don't get to use the aromatherapy unless I put some coals on in my backyard, which I actually did today. I am a big fan of frankincense and myrrh, so I just huddle all that stuff into this brass container, and it creates all this smoke in my little tent. But anyway, I like making use of all kinds of weather. This hot weather, even though it sucks, I make the best use of it by pretending it's a bathhouse.
Frankincense and myrrh, that's very like Persian, very Persian elite. So you're like doing something very like elite there. Like, have you got some herbs and spices on your food as well? I mean, that's, I like that. I like it. Frankincense and myrrh. It's very old fashioned, very Middle Eastern-y, rich.
Orthodoxincense.com. That's my plug for tonight. It's a great website. You get all kinds of great herbs and spices there.
All right, fantastic. Orthodoxincense.com. Get onto it. All right. Well, anyway, look, let's dig into the meat and potatoes, because how did you get inspired to build such a great channel with such a great aspirational goal? Because we're the same. I don't have a political bone in my body. You guys don't want to talk about politics, and I'm so sick of politics. The internet is saturated with the left and right. He said, she said, and I hate it. I don't like it. So how did you come up with the idea for having such a great conversational channel?
So our show, we call it Lev and Jules Break the Rules. And it's because we make eclectic content. We're very passionate about freedom of speech. And there was a couple of things that inspired us. We met at an entrepreneurial meetup, and we started noticing censorship on the web. So we wanted to kind of create this big living room where everyone was in it at the same time. So we live in New York, we both grew up in New York, and we have a lot of mutual friends, but also a lot of people that disagree with each other and don't like to break their own echo chambers. Like, I'm very interested in the future and transhumanism. Lev's very passionate about esotericism and religion, and we have very similar tastes with animation and games and books, and so we complement each other, and we have our differences, but we love bringing people together and elevating dialogue. So for a while, our channel has kind of felt like if you go to our channel right now, we have 200 subscribers, which we're very proud of, because some of these subscribers are actually very impressive, but it's been like a prototype show, right? We're still, if you're familiar with Peter Thiel's book 0 to 1, we're still in the process of going from 0 to 1, right? So we're about to do a brand update with Kimberly Butler, who's a photographer. She did a book called The Art of Fear, which Neil Gaiman wrote the introduction for. She also shot Muhammad Ali, Taylor Swift. Did she ever shoot Kanye West? Did she photograph Kanye West?
I don't think she photographed Kanye West, but she did photograph Muammar Gaddafi back when Barbara Walters did an interview with him. She travels all around the world photographing all kinds of scary things that are going on there, so she is definitely quite a character.
And she did an art exhibit called Censored, where she did these photographs of nude models, and then she would have quotes from books like Fahrenheit 451, 1984, Brave New World. And Lev did an animation for her years ago, and they connected at the New York's Arts Club. So our channel is very loosely affiliated with the National Arts Club, and this is how we've kind of been a nexus for bringing people together. But we also have a program on a rag, some people call it a right-wing rag. It's not really at all. It's actually a very progressive media site, and we're like their most liberal people on the show. Like, we just had a polyamorous relationship counselor on. We had a filmmaker from the Tribeca Film Festival. She made this VR movie. She's also a doctor, and she's an internist at Rikers, which is like a maximum security prison in New York. So she's like a filmmaker slash maximum security prison doctor. And so we meet all these fascinating people. We're bringing them on the show. We're doing a big brand update. We're about to launch our Twitch, and yeah, and we just launched our Medium blog page. So we're really hoping to go from 0 to 1 within the next couple of months. It's actually a very exciting time for us right now.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I like the people you've had on already. I thought the BJ Murphy. I want to have BJ Murphy on as well. I thought that was really cool because, like, if I was political, I think I'd probably be opposite to what he is. But yeah, he seems like a really interesting person. And what about you, Lev? How about you? How did you end up getting entwined with Mr. Jules Hamilton?
So I was originally born in St. Petersburg, Russia. My family, you could say we fled from there in around 93. Fled may not be the exact correct word because the Soviet Union was already dissolved, but at the same time it was still hard. Like, we still had to meet the right government officials in order for them to approve certain documents that we had. But we got out of Russia, thank God, moved to America, and one of the things that we found here was, well, found in America, since this program is in Australia. I'm sure Australia is a beautiful country, but in America, we just found that everybody was very different from Russian people. Everybody was so nice. They wanted to help us out with moving the furniture up to our new apartment. So that is something that really inspired me to start finding out, like, what exactly makes America so great in comparison to a lot of other countries. And that's something that brought me to reading about, like, Thomas Sowell, for example, Thomas Sowell's Basic Economics. So when I met Jules at this event, this was something that was the first thing that cemented our relationship. When I was talking about Thomas Sowell, found out Jules likes Thomas Sowell, and there aren't that many people in that circle that we were in during that event that would have agreed with us that much. So this is something that forms these relationships in a very liberal city like New York. But what I really value about Jules is that he does not put a ring of fire around us and only let the initiated people in, you know, the people who agree with us and all that stuff. We want to reach out to other people, and I think we're going to do that very successfully because the left is becoming crazier and crazier by the day, and I think people who are general liberals, who are just interested, you know, making art, making movies, they don't really hold a really strong social justice type opinion. I don't think they're going to be able to survive that world. And I think the more that we reach out and open ourselves up, the more there could be a new, I wouldn't necessarily call it a movement, but I would just call it a group of like-minded people that have common sense that aren't going to fling poo at each other.
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. So your parents obviously must have grown up in the Soviet Union, in St. Petersburg. That's I mean, and they fled from, well, I guess when the oligarchs were breaking it all down and carving it all up. That's a profound story. It's not quite an unusual story. I know there was a lot of migrants from Russia to the United States at that time. There was kind of a mass exodus after the balkanization, after the whole thing split in '89. But yeah, it's fascinating to think that you're part of that legacy and that story. Russia's a completely different country now. It's embraced capitalism in a way.
Not really. It embraced a sham what people could call capitalism, but isn't really. If you have a successful business in Russia, it gets taken away by Putin's cronies. So people don't really want to invest in Russia as much, I think, partly because of that. But Russia has had a long history of criminal activity. Like, we had a show where this guy who we were interviewing, Logo Daedalus, he was talking about how President Putin kicked out all the oligarchs and created a sense of order in Russia. That is absolute baloney. Putin, back when he was deputy prime minister in St. Petersburg, he was smuggling cocaine from the St. Petersburg harbor. He was in the drug trade, and he kept that thing going all this time. All of his crime buddies got promoted to positions of power in Russia, and they love showing Moscow, for example, as this beautiful, clean capital city, while what they're actually doing is taking all the trash and throwing it out to all the surrounding cities and neighborhoods, and the forests as well. So people want to complain about this, but people don't really have that much power in relation to the power of the elected officials. So it's a shame, and I wish it would change.
Okay. Well, that's terribly interesting. Well, anyway, so you guys interview all these different people. How do you do it? Do you have like sort of a list of people, potential people, and you approach them, or you write emails,
well,
or
kind
letters?
of how you came on. I mean, it's sort of, a lot of it's just sort of because we're doing other things, and then we're also getting feedback from people in our own circles, right? Like, some people be like, don't talk to that person, don't talk to this person, oh, that person didn't make any sense, oh, like, why, you guys look so weird, like, you guys are embarrassing yourselves, like, why don't you just quit? And so we kind of, like, that internecine can, like, be a big part of the development process. And so we're kind of like beacons that, like, also attract people that might want to participate. And so we reach out, people reach out to us, like how we're doing this right now. You reached out to us because you saw some of our stuff, because I guess we've been friends on Facebook due to the transhumanist community. I had BJ Murphy on my show, and Gennadi was our first guest. And I used to write for Serious Wonder a little bit. And that's what's so awesome about this age in Facebook and social media. Like, when some people say, like, social media is a menace to society, it's like, to who, right? Like, so I think that it's actually very exciting.
Yeah, I agree. I find that like I actually have a fairly optimistic outlook on social media, although I like to utilize it as a tool. But yeah, if I had to live in that experience like some people do, I can understand why people get frustrated at it, and they don't like it. But there's also all these alternative social media platforms, and it's like you can utilize them as a tool. So it's like, where do you guys stand on the while we're talking about social media, where do you guys stand on the free speech? It's their platform. It's a big corporation. You know, they have a monopoly. All that argument, that debate.
We butt heads on this. Although I think I might have made some progress persuading Lev. I'm not sure, but I think that they're private companies and they should be able to do what they want. And the reason is, so let's say they start egregiously censoring people, right? That will be a catalyst for a migration, as in people would leave and innovate in the market sooner, and no laws would have been in place that would make it harder for the startups. Because what often happens, the regulations that are put into place increase the barriers to entry. It makes it harder for the innovators. So you create all these penny wise, pound foolish situations where it's let's say Facebook wants to censor, they censored, let's say they want to censor transhumanists, right? They want to censor, people that, like, let's say Facebook gets into a fight with Elon Musk and they're like, or Facebook says, we don't want you advertising about Bitcoin. If you're posting about Bitcoin, we're kicking you off the platform. right? And let's say people get very upset about their freedom of speech there. Now, if you were to pass a regulation about what they would be required to do, how they would be required to regulate their social media, any competitor to Facebook would also have to meet that regulation. And so it would make Facebook like a bigger giant and make it harder for Facebook to fall. Now, if you don't regulate it and people genuinely are dissatisfied with the product, like they will rebel faster. The catalyst for migration would happen faster, and then you would have new solutions emerge in the market. So the laws of the free market have a lot to do with like dynamic physics, and it's the science of the complexity. And so this is why some people like to insult libertarians or free market people as like thinking about the market as a deity, like almost like having like a religious faith in the free market. And it's because I think some people are more in tune with the dynamics of complexity than others. And I think a lot of religious people use God as a shortcut, like through metaphors, to actually understanding like the dynamics of emergence, like and how emergence works, right? And how things emerge from nothing.
And what about you, Lev?
By the way, I'm an atheist.
I am not an atheist, but as far as the point that Jules brings up, I think that there is a lot of relevance there. My problem is if it's not this hopefully beautiful scenario of people leaving in droves as soon as the censorship starts to ramp up more than it is right now. The other way of looking at it is, well, what if it's the boiling frog approach, where slowly they're starting to implement certain things that you're not allowed to say, not allowed to talk about, and people don't notice it that much at first. They'd go after the Alex Joneses, they'd go after people that the majority, or at least the majority of mainstream people and people who are tuned into the mainstream find to be, for some reason, reprehensible. And from there, they're slowly going to chip away at other people, and before you know it, we may end up living in the world where certain things that we're allowed to say right now, we're not allowed to say anymore. Like if we look at what we were allowed to say a decade ago at certain, like comedy clubs or certain subjects that today you would get kicked off of Facebook for talking about. I don't know if it's going to get worse. Maybe it won't. Maybe Jules is absolutely right, and as soon as they start increasing that amount of censorship, everybody's going to leave. But I just see this fork on the road here, and I don't know which way it's going to go.
I like that idea.
It's not a fork. It's like
Trident, a prong.
mycelial architecture.
Mm-hmm.
I like that idea though, because it's algorithmically based, right? So like in real life, if you don't like something, you can go to a club under the ground and it's midnight and there it is and it's unpoliced. With Facebook, it's not like you can go somewhere that the algorithms can't police, if you know what I mean. Like it's always policed, so there's no like secret space or something like that. So I kind of like that notion, yeah. So are you worried about transhumanists, for example, being kicked off because of their idea? I mean, Francis Fukuyama said that transhumanism is the most dangerous idea in the world. Do you think they would take it to that degree, like ideas based, or do you think they would leave people alone? Because I know in the Senate committees and stuff, they say it's the snippets of information that they censor, not the people. What do you think? Ideas? Do you think they would censor ideas?
I don't think they'll censor transhumanism. I think transhumanism is pretty safe to the Facebook, because I think they're favorable towards transhumanism in the long run. Bitcoin, though, they're not as favorable to. We shared something about Tim Berners-Lee, and he posted something about, what's his thing called, Urbit? Is that his new?
No, no, it's not Urbit. Urbit is Curtis Yarwain, aka Mencius Moldbugs. I don't remember what Tim Berners-Lee's is called, but I can look it up.
So Tim Berners-Lee is trying to create an alternative to the web, like a different way to search on the web and store data on the web, because he thinks Google and a lot of these big tech giants have kind of like taken over everything and like created a surveillance state, and like nobody has any privacy. And so he wants to create like a web alternative. And so we were trying to post about that and advertise about that. And Facebook was like, this goes against our community standards, like we don't allow it. And so when it comes to competitors to Facebook, I think they're a lot more likely to censor. And once I posted a video about Milton Friedman describing cryptocurrency, like before it ever existed, like in the 80s. And when I posted it, Facebook flagged it. And like, if I'm not mistaken, they were like accusing me of like posting about like terrorism. They were like, this is terrorism, like this goes against our community standards. And I had to like be like, no, it's not. I had to like, and so now it's like back allowed on my Facebook. But it's like, you know, I think also memes are something that, like, if you're posting like really grotesque memes, like if you're in a medical group and people are posting, you know, like surgery memes in a private group and stuff, like I'm not in any groups like that, but I've seen horrific stuff on Facebook, and frankly I'm glad they police it and censor it. So that's why I think they should have the freedom as a private company to regulate it any way they want.
I just don't want these social networks to dumb people down. And we've always had this kind of conversation throughout time, like whether people, you know, back in the day, they used to complain about books existing because people couldn't keep more information inside of their heads. You know, like we could go on and on about what is the next big devil that's going to bring down civilization. But I do notice that people are spending a lot more time on social media, obviously, and as far as the influences that they're getting, some are therapeutic, like Jules was talking about how celebrities are now becoming much more aware of what they say has a direct effect on people, so they're focusing much more on healing people as far as talking about mental illness and stuff like that. But what scares me a little bit, though, is language being reduced a la 1984 on the internet, certain terms like fascist being applied in a broad spectrum covering everybody from like Ben Shapiro to you know, you name it. So that is something that's probably existed before, like in the 60s. Radicals were directly influenced by the USSR here in America. A lot of professors got money. Pablo Picasso delivered briefcases of cash in support of the communist cause. So as far as the amount of fervor that was going on back in the 60s, I think it was probably a lot more than now. But as far as the amount of influence that these kind of ideas have amongst like Gen Z, like, I don't know, like certain articles talk about how Gen Z is this, you know, the based generation, like they're even more conservative than the greatest generation. But I don't know. I think that is also a coping mechanism, possibly. I don't really know what the next generation is going to be like for the most part. Like, obviously, you're going to have groups of people that are going to be into Thomas Sowell, that are going to be into reading about a lot of these ancient philosophers and so on and so forth. But I don't know, like 80-20 rule, I don't know how many of those people are going to be active as opposed to people that can be empowered by the Ocasio-Cortezes of the world. Like how many of those, I mean, right now it's still very small, like she's not that popular in the United States, but I think it may have a potential to grow depending on if there is some kind of a slow and steady influence. I wouldn't call it mind control necessarily, but in those in those areas there could be some danger.
Well, I know a lot of so I grew up with a lot of the people that are shaping this dialogue. So, for example, Cortez and Ilhan Omar, they were on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine. I grew up with, like, I used to hang out at the Great Lawn with Gus Wenner, who now is like pretty much in charge of Rolling Stone magazine. And so, like, we used to call the Great Lawn the teenage wasteland, and we would all go there and play frisbee and kickball, and you know, it'd be like hundreds of us out there. And we would go there every day after school. And, you know, now we're all growing up, and like tongue in cheek, it's kind of like, I call it the Gossip Girl egregore. Like an egregore is an esoteric term for like a collective thought form, right? But basically, like a lot of the people, like coastal elites, like New Yorkers, people in LA, like they shape a lot of the current events dialogues and the framing a lot of these discussions. So even though Ilhan Omar and Cortez are not very popular, like a lot of people that I grew up with are also very invested in their popularity. And I think it's because they're passionate about having a positive impact on culture. And so I try to participate. So someone I went to school with and was in writing classes with, her name is E.J. Dixon. So she's a writer. She writes for all sorts of stuff. And like we've had a couple of interactions on Twitter, like semi recently. And so for the most part, like she's a little too cool for me, so she ignores me. But so she's like very, very, if I'm not mistaken, she's Marxist. If I'm not mistaken, she's an atheist Marxist, right? And so I kind of have started to think about atheists. There's like different types of atheists, right? You have like alpha and omega atheists, and then you have infinite jest atheists, like David Foster Wallace, right? And so I think this is a good place to kind of think about those things over time.
What brought you to atheism? And Lev, when he's finished, what brought you to Thomas Sowell?
Well, I was baptized, and I went to a Unitarian church every Sunday, it's like their symbol is like everybody, like all walks of life are like holding hands around a globe. You have like a Muslim and a Hindu and a Jewish person and a Catholic and, all sorts of stuff. I think they have to add a Scientology in there somehow. They can have a little alien or something. But I remember going there every Sunday, and we would learn about all sorts of different types of religions. And I remember raising my hand once, and I would say, if you don't believe in God, like, why should you be here? And they're like, oh, well, you should be here too. Like, you're welcome here too. And over time, I learned more about the significance of that. So what brought me to atheism is really like pedantry for language. It's really sensitivity to language. And like I like to tell people I'm an atheist who believes in God, because I think when you're trying to have productive conversations of persuasion, like if you want to talk about how the economy works, if someone will try to use a shortcut to determine whether or not your opinion is worth listening to. So they might say, like, so other atheists, if they learn you believe in God, they'll tell themselves, why should I listen to anything you have to say? Right? Why should I listen to anything you have to say if you believe in an imaginary man in the sky? Right? That's omniscient and omnipresent, and then you're going to go to heaven afterwards, and whatever your story is, you have all these different religions. They all contradict each other. Why is yours right while the other ones are wrong? Like, you think you're going to get 72 virgins in heaven, or you think if, there's like 80 different types of Catholicism and Christians, and Lev's actually much more well-versed in religion than I am, having gone to a Unitarian like church growing up. Like Lev is like close to an expert, in my opinion, when it comes to this stuff. Absolutely. It is so impressive, like the knowledge that he has. And I think it's just, I don't believe in an anthropomorphic, omnipresent, omniscient God. Like, I think I'm God, I think you're God, I think Lev's God, I think God is everything, right? I think it's the culmination of the universe, right? And I think that there's a poverty to language, and that we only have the words at our disposal to describe reality. So atheism is a rejection of the anthropomorphic view of God. But as an atheist, I don't believe in nothingness. Right? As in, I believe the reason why there is something rather than nothing is because of emergence. Nothing is unstable, right? The reason there's nothing is because nothing is unstable and things emerge from nothing, right? Like we think in terms of finiteness and like beginnings and ends, but God, for lack of a better word, the universe, existence is infinite, right? And so that's just shy of our understanding of things. We can contemplate just shy of infinity in my book, at least. And so I think that is what brought me to atheism, is semantics and nuance. And I don't believe in an afterlife. I think when you die, like it's like a very Buddhist sort of Final Fantasy VII, like Mako energy, like you're sort of recycled through the universe, and like you live on through the ripples of your actions.
Before I get to Thomas Sowell, I wanted to shortly give my take, as opposed to Jules's take, which I respect. I think Jules is incredibly smart, and I am of the opinion that there is nothing that I could put a stamp on and say, this is the exact truth for sure. I still have a lot more learning to do. Maybe I'm going to become an atheist later on. I don't know. But I went to Catholic school where I learned absolutely nothing. In fact, Catholic school got me out of religion wholeheartedly. Even though my family is Jewish, not practicing Jewish, as a lot of Jewish folks tend to be here in the United States, like Reform Jews, you know, they go to synagogue and whatever, but it's not as conservative. But anyway, Catholic school didn't really do that much, so I got out of religion, and I was also of the opinion of, if we have all of these different religions all around the world that believe in different things, you know, either one of them has to be right, or maybe none of them are right at all, they're just making all this stuff up. But then one thing that changed my perspective was when I started to meditate, and certain personal experiences that I've had, which, you know, they could possibly be explained by something that's going on with my neurons or whatever. Whatever that is, the end result is that the experiences that I have had, I was able to patchwork together in my head with all the other different esoteric beliefs from religions all around the world, where I did start to find a common pattern as far as there being one thing that everything comes out of, but that thing represents itself as a infinite imagination that we're currently in. I know that sounds very hippy-dippy and all that, but if Jules talks about emergent properties, I'm not going to put a limit to how far those emergent properties go to, or I'm not going to put a limit to say that those emergent properties just started from physical matter. As a human being, we tend to have various dreams, various fantasies throughout the day, and I am of the belief that we can train ourselves, or there could be some kind of experience that we, as ego beings, could have that is way more advanced than something we're capable of doing right now, as far as being able to create our own worlds. Not something that we can't really hold on to unless we draw it or unless we model it like Pixar animates its movies, but something much more substantial, where we may be able to create life or something crazy like that. Like, I know this sounds, you know, very loony, but my whole point here is that I'm not putting a dam on how far the imagination of existence could go. I think it's really unlimited, the amount of experiences that we as the experiencers can have. But as far as Thomas Sowell goes, to answer your question, since my parents were from the Soviet Union, like I said before, they grew up in that horrible, horrible environment much more than I did. I was just 88. I was born in 88, so it was still the Soviet Union, but I don't really remember that much. They had to go through actual torture. Like, a lot of their friends went to these psycho clinics. They were forced into these clinics. They were drugged with these mind-altering substances that turned some of them into vegetables, as an example to set to all the other dissidents at the Soviet Union at the time. Like, it wasn't people being sent out to gulags when Stalin was in charge, but it wasn't that great either. So that was something that made me think, what exact system allows for this kind of brutality to exist and for people to do nothing? And I think that the easiest way right now for me to explain it is that this is something that happens in a socialist system, where the government for all the beautiful notions that it espouses to people, has control over what people are able to do and has control of the economy. And people can't fight against it. People can create prosperity through trading with each other in the private market system. So the whole thing ended up falling down eventually. The Soviet Union crumbled. But while it was still in power, it was not a great place to live. Even the Soviet Union back in the 60s, 70s, it was a world power. You know, you would think a capital like Moscow or St. Petersburg, that they would have the best resources since they were extracting it from all these other areas that they conquered. But regular Soviet citizens couldn't find toilet paper anywhere. You know, just basic necessities were not there. And it wasn't a time when the Soviet Union was this, poor nation that the CIA was constantly fighting and it couldn't maintain itself. It was an empire. It could maintain itself pretty well, if not for its horrible system of economics.
All right, very interesting. So, is the atheism for Jules? Is the atheism the reason that you're into transhumanism because you think that this is the one shot and we've got to make the best of it, and you want to transcend yourself?
Yeah, I would like to live forever or die trying, as Joseph Heller says in Catch-22. I forget through which character. Or like Woody Allen says, I want to live forever not through my work, but I want to live forever sitting in my apartment. But also I think, leaving. Jason Silva made a video about. Goodness, it was a while ago. It was about anxiety or like the source of depression or mental illness or one of those things. And he basically says that it's the problem of death, that basically everybody is afraid of death and that we all push it to our subconscious and we have like different solutions. Like you have the romantic solution where you deify your lover, which is a short-term solution. You have the religious narrative where you believe that you live on after you die, and then you have like the legacy one where you live on through your work, or you leave behind you build a legacy for your children, or you write a bunch of books and you leave a legacy for readers, or you make a bunch of movies and you leave a legacy for viewers, and you sort of live on through the ripples of your actions and that kind of stuff. And so that, to me, of those three, like I think that I don't think deifying I think commitment's important. Like I do deify my lovers anyway. I'm a very romantic person, but I don't think that's like a good solution to like the death problem, to anxiety, right? Because if that's your solution, what starts to happen is their clay feet become more apparent over time, and then they become kind of like a mirror to you, and then you start becoming like familiarity can breed contempt. And then like you go into this feedback loop of like their flaws and your flaws and their flaws and your flaws. And unless like these days, like if you don't have a religious commitment or like a religious belief about love, and we can talk about that later, I think this is why so many people get divorced and things like that, and I think that is something that people need to overcome, and transhumanism, though, is appealing to me because aging is an engineering problem, right? Aging is the accumulation of damage in the cells. And instead of like slowing down the accumulation of damage or like maintaining it later in life through geriatrics, I think that just physically removing the damage from the cells, like maintaining your car over time, is the optimal long-term solution. Now, you still might slip on a banana peel or have a cinder block fall on your head or something, but people have always seen death as ghastly and inevitable. And if you take away the inevitability part of the equation and you just turn inevitable to indefinite, you can really change the game. And I think this is something that a lot of people resist because they've come up with these coping mechanisms like the pro-aging trance. Like that's not even something they would want to do, right? So they ignore the possibility, even though it's like we're right on the cusp of it. So so there's a lot of PR challenges to waking people up.
And
I'm
so,
with Jules, by the way. I am
yeah,
with Jules 100%. I want to live as long as possible too.
but how do you marry that with religious orthodoxy?
I think that any kind of medical breakthrough that people have had throughout the millennia has contributed to people being able to exist longer on this planet. Some of those people use that for, the purpose of reading more books. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to gain a lot more knowledge and insight and wisdom as I grow older. That's the plan, at least. Unless I go crazy or something, then I want to contribute that to humanity as a whole, to be able to figure out like what are certain things that could be done in a much more efficient way. And this is some quality that seems to be awakened in people who have lived, like people have the town elder, at least back in the day in the village, they had the town elder who knew all the answers. And the only problem there is that that guy's already old, he's going to die soon, and then you're not going to have an elder anymore. But if we have people who develop this sense of wisdom through living for a long time, through having all kinds of experiences, then they could pass on a lot of valuable things to the next generation. So in that sense, I see that as being a definite requirement for our time here on Earth, to be able to acquire wisdom and pass it on. So any kind of notion of like, oh, you're supposed to die when you're supposed to die, well, says who? Like if a bug bites me and I die from that infection, and I could have prevented that by living in a first world nation where they figured that stuff out, I don't think that there's any argument there. Why would I choose to die from something that's preventable? And like Jules is talking about, if lifespan could be enhanced to 200, 500, thousands of years, I think we can cope with that. I don't think that's a problem.
So when it says in the Bible that God limited the years after, because when he created Adam and Eve in the garden and all that, everyone had exceptionally long lifespans. Methuselah was 970 or something, and Adam lived to 800 and something, and everybody lived a long time. And then after the flood came, the watches and all that happened, and then he said, all right, I'm limiting the lifespan to 120 years. Is that a problem there? Like when God's said that there's a 120 year span limit, and now you're saying, no, it's all right, we can break that rule?
Well, that implies that I subscribe to the Bible, which, if there is something that's going to happen with our lifespans where it's going to be longer than 120 years, and people use that for the benefit of humanity, I don't necessarily care that this was written in the Bible. There are a lot of different books that were written in terms of creating systems of control so people can, I wouldn't say that it stopped people from killing each other, because obviously we've had a lot of religious wars. But as far as being that strict, like, there are Jews that don't follow all the, I don't remember how many commandments, like 600 and something of that nature. And even though I consider myself to be Jewish, I don't follow that. And I know that there are Christians who aren't always being as Christian as they could be. So I take whatever was written in the Bible to be, especially like if we're talking about the golden rule, do unto others as you would want to have done unto you. That is a beautiful thing, and we are all the better for it. But at the same time, being that much of a stickler to certain rules that were set back in the time when people were living in these desert tribal communities, I don't know how it's going to turn out. Maybe a giant golden cube is going to land on the planet Earth and is going to take all the saved. But again, here we're going into uncharted territories where I don't have any proof at all that the stuff that is written in the Bible or the Torah is legitimate. One other thing that I could say, though, is I like looking at this entire existence as a giant Rube Goldberg machine, where certain, I guess you could call it, spectral influences set things up in a certain way for there to be a certain result. So if it does turn out that living to 500 years old artificially is going to usher in some weird mark of the beast society, then if that's what's supposed to happen, then that's what's supposed to happen. I'm not in charge of that. But right now, I don't really see any reason to stop technologically
It wouldn't
innovating.
be artificial. It would be natural. It would be a natural. If we're living to 500 years, anything that exists in nature is caused by nature. I'm sorry to cut you off there, Lev.
No, that's true. That's a good point. That's a good point. Like, we have all these books that talk about, let's say, the story of Jesus Christ versus the story of Mithra. You know, a lot of these mythologies repeat themselves. You could look at that in two ways. You could look at that as being a fractal repetition of certain people, like video game characters, going through the same events. Or you could say that they directly took a lot of the stuff that came from these earlier legends that talk about a time before the flood, before, like, according to Graham Hancock, for example. Are you familiar with Graham Hancock's work? Okay, so Graham Hancock, he's this rebellious archaeologist that I had, and I forgot to mention this. Jules mentioned it a little bit, but I'm the chair of the Art and Technology Committee at the National Arts Club in New York City in Gramercy Park. So we had Graham Hancock there for the fourth time, and he talks about how there was a meteor crash around 11,000 years ago on the upper part of the Americas that wiped out a lot of ancient civilizations. So people had to start again. The survivors had to give the information about, you know, how you construct a civilization, how you build certain things, how you have a system of laws to the people who survived that gigantic cataclysm. And that I see as being very related to the story of the flood in the Bible, as well as a lot of the other flood mythology. So as far as any other rules that were put in place that were written in the book, I see it as being important for implementing exactly where we are right now. But that also doesn't mean that certain things weren't written in there to suppress certain qualities that people could possess. Maybe for better, maybe for worse. It's difficult for me to say right now. But I think that people, as people, have an influence over what got written in that book. If you're talking about the Jews living in Babylon during that whole time, I'm sure they were inspired by a lot of the mythology that they found in the Babylonian captivity. For example, we have certain things like in Hinduism, we have Shiva and Shakti. Shiva is the right side up triangle, Shakti is the upside down triangle, and when the two meet, they form the Star of David, or the heart chakra, as in the tantric systems of Hinduism. And what that means, from what I'm able to understand, is the meeting of heaven and earth, is the meeting of the ultimate oneness of existence with everything that it produced, with this whole nature that we're living in right now that's constantly animated, constantly, like Heraclitus said, you can never step into the same river twice. This is the animated reality that we're living in. You know, Mother Gaia, Mother Earth, whatever you want to call it, this quality of constant movement and constant animation, that when it's met with the infinite holiness of the oneness that we all came out of, according to this mythology, there is a balance that is achieved. And in the system of Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, they also refer to this central area as beauty, Tifereth, I think it's called. And to me, that signifies that there is a need to balance things out. There is a need to love one another. I mean, that goes back to the golden rule, right? But that principle came from all these different influences that people got from all these ancient civilizations. So that's why I can't put my trust fully in one book that had a certain role to play in this experience that we're in. And that's why I am for whatever Jules is talking about with living longer.
See, you know, Thomas Aquinas said, beware the man of one book. And Lev is absolutely not a man of one book. He is a sage. He is a sage. And I also like Nassim Taleb's silver rule, which is don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you. That's a variation on the golden rule.
Very interesting. So, transhumanism is directed evolution. Is that what you're saying, Jules?
Yes, and I think there's a huge difference. There's a huge difference between self-directed evolution and eugenics. Like, I'm very anti-eugenics, and I'm very pro self-directed evolution.
And Lev, you're saying transhumanism is a tool like penicillin.
I think we have all these tools at our disposal. I mean, if you really want to get deep in the rabbit hole, you could talk about Tubal Cain, who gave people metallurgy, and how that was also given to him through the knowledge of the Nephilim, the fallen angels. So if we want to be very strict about where this knowledge comes from, we could say, oh my god, all this technology that we're using right now is all demonic. Let's throw it all away. But no, we're in a world where, things eat other things. Life takes other life. We extract resources and we use those resources to help each other. But I also see a lot of improvements along the way, as far as technology improving to such an extent that I hope we can eliminate a lot of the needless deaths, for example, that happen with farming equipment when it destroys a lot of these little critters. Like you have all these vegans who are talking about, how progressive they are for ordering the salad instead of the steak. While how many little animals died in the production of this grass, as opposed to, let's say, if you're a hunter, like karmically, I'd see that as being much more ethical. You're a hunter, you kill this moose or whatever, and you eat some moose steaks for the entire year. Like if you weigh those two things together, I don't know.
Yeah, that's quantity argument. That's very interesting. I like that. Yeah, and I like the idea that because the angels came down and they gifted all the technology. Because if you think about it, God ordered an ark to be built, and an ark is a huge technological. It's amounted to a huge technology progress just before they went into the ark. So they had this burst of technology and science and all this other stuff, which God ordered them to do, which would have inevitably transferred those skills through the flood. So that's an interesting point.
I would also add one more thing about the Ark. My own take on it is that they had a lot of DNA samples. Like, I'm going with Graham Hancock when he talks about advanced civilizations, and I'm upping it to the nth degree by imagining an Ark that wasn't just, pieces of wood that were built in such a way as to withstand the flood, but there were instruments in there related to genetic engineering. Like, I'm going to go, like, if we're talking about the Ark, I am going to extend it very far in the realms of what is possible. Because with a limited amount of time that we've had these past millennia, we've made great strides, especially in the last 500 years. So I wouldn't be surprised if instead of having this idea of history from, like these stupid cavemen to smart us, if it wasn't a little bit of a roller coaster ride. But anyway, that's just my take.
So you interviewed Gennadi as your first interview. That shows your dedication. How was that interview? Why did you get him? And what did you guys learn?
I fought for that.
Yeah. How was that?
For that. Lev at first was. I don't know. Lev, do you even remember our process in the beginning? We've been doing this over a year, bro. We've been doing this over a year.
Wow.
I remember when. I was trying to get all the robot people on, the robot cult people, and Lev.
I love robot people. No, I love robot people. They're great. I have no problem. I love Gennadi. He was a great dude to talk with. He has a great top hat symbol with a little golden thing on there. He's awesome. No, I love all the guests that Jules brings in. What I want to do, though, like I've been talking to Jules about for a long time, and I think we've been doing this somewhat, is I want to start bringing in more, not just leftists, but neoliberals in. I want to bring in people who are in a totally different world, because it seems like that is a world that's looking around, and I don't know if they're necessarily liking a lot of the changes that they see as far as the outrage culture. Like, I don't know, like in Australia, what's the situation like with that? How many people who you would say have always been on the mainstream are looking around and seeing the people who are demanding very outrageous things, and they're just going along with it because they don't want to offend people, they don't want to be the target of harassment. Do you see something like that going on in Australia?
Well, the Australian scenario is basically we live under a Murdoch regime, so Murdoch controls the mainstream media, and press class essentially didn't like Trump, even though Murdoch himself did. So there was kind of this internal war. At least in America, you had a very like concise, like Fox News was definitely very pro Republican Party, and you could have somewhere to flee. Here, they didn't like him because they didn't understand him, and I understand America very well. You know, my girlfriend used to be American, and I understand. I read a lot about America. I love American culture. I think America's a great place. But I understand the empire dynamics of America, and I understand the mass poverty in the cities, and I understand that Flint, Michigan's story, and I understand, you know, there's a lot of problems. You know, it's being hollowed out, and in Australia, because we're being protected. Under the guise of the aircraft carriers, which are forcing us to trade, we're just a little sort of very peaceful, stable country down here, and they don't want that to shift. And so they all got into bed with Obama Hillary class, thinking that that's where all of the stability was globally. So because they don't understand America from the inside. And so when Trump's talking about America first, and he's talking about let's fix the crime in our cities. They're hearing, let's reject our allies, and so they're saying, well, then anything Trump does is bad because it's a rejection of us as a peaceful, stable country in Oceania/Asia. And that's not what was happening. What Trump was trying to say that we've got a mess, we've got to go domestic, we've got to clean it up, we've got a lot of hard work to do and hard yards to follow. The Australian media didn't get that. So then you had a rise of very hard left, very hard edge communist / wannabe socialist / hard edge left. And so the media then, and the police and the academia and everybody else sort of rolled over and said, well, that's our best chance at internationally being known as anti-Trump. That's how we'll do that. And they allowed them to grow and breed and get out of control to the point where they got into fundamental systems and started to reshape the culture of Australia from being actually an egalitarian, pretty peaceful, pretty graceful, pretty good society into something that we haven't seen before, which is gross. It's disgusting, and they've started to take away freedoms. And it's not like America, where we don't have a Bill of Rights, we don't have speech rights and all that other stuff. So the government can just arbitrarily take rights away, and there's nothing people can do about it. And so then these hard-edged sort of anti-Trumpians were allowed by the government to breed up so that they could take these rights away. And that's just sort of how it went around and around and around like that. This channel here was one of the pushbacks against it. Yeah, it's a very awful scenario that's left our country sort of in a perilous situation, especially on our civil rights front. All because of American internal politics, which the media class does not understand at all. They don't get it. Because when they, I mean, I've never been to America, but I get it. Like, I got it. I've got writings going back to 2016 explaining how Trump will win and why he'll win and how he wins with certain worker demographics and all this sort of stuff. It was nothing really about foreign policy. It was if the foreign policy kind of was, let's pull back and use that money to fix internal structural problems, and that's what they didn't like. So, yeah, so they didn't get that, and we're losing our rights.
Are you familiar with the Imam of Peace? He lives in Australia, doesn't he?
Yeah, Imam Tawhidi. Yeah, I met him. Yeah, he's very nice.
So he seems to like be an alarmist to some movements in Australia. Is that something you follow at all?
Oh, you mean
I noticed on the ticker on the bottom, I saw something about ISIS earlier on the bottom ticker.
Yeah.
So I thought I was curious if that's something that Australia thinks about at all.
Oh yeah, so proportionally, we have a non-discriminatory immigration system, just like America used to before they banned those certain countries before Trump came in. But it's non-discriminatory. It's a points-based system. We do accept a lot of refugees, but there's certain aspects of society here that just don't integrate. So you have certain Muslim sections that just become essentially their own towns, their own language ghettos, and things like that. They just don't integrate, and then they expect Australian law to sort of flow around them like a river, right? And it's like, hey, let us be our own community. Same is happening in London or in the UK as a broader sense. And America is not so much. I know they make such a big deal out of it over there because you have such a large vocal Christian community, but it's not actually a huge problem as they make out to be. But it can be quite bad here, at times. So the Imam, he's kind of this liberal front man for the government who's trying to say, everyone, let's work it out, let's all be peaceful. Let's stop the extremists from getting too much power. Let's cut back on the social justice warrior virtue signaling and stuff like that. Because it's like there is a group of Muslims that actually want to integrate and just ride on the benefits of our society. They just want to shut up and do that, and there's plenty of that do. But then the small vocal minority are ruining it for them, and they don't want that. So then the people like the Imam will speak up and say, all right, everybody, you have to really kick these guys out because we actually want to be a peaceful community and we don't want to be lumped together. But they lump them together, and because of what's going on in Europe, and so everyone gets angry, and that's sort of the Imam's take on
Does
things.
he say they need to kick him out, or is he like a de-radicalizer?
De-radicalizer.
Is he someone that basically... I feel like he's someone that's trying to like intensify and magnify on like festering pockets.
He's a de-radicalizer.
De-radicalizers so that people can, problem solve like what could be a slow motion disaster like growing in front of them.
No, yeah, you're right. He's a de-radicalizer. So he calls for active de-radicalization, deportation, and other things that will stop what he claims is peaceful majority Muslims from being targets of pogroms. But yeah, you understand the joke. But that's kind of what he's saying. Yeah, so it's hit the vocal, loud, hard ones, and a lot of people don't like it because they actually want to target everyone. But if they're going to target anyone, well, he knows where to target because and I mean we live in Australia, so we've got Indonesia above us, which is the largest Muslim country on earth. So what are you going to do? I mean, we live in we've got India there, which is more Muslims, than So what's Australia going to do? I'm not sure. So.
When it comes to, let's say, in England, you have a population of people who are Hindu, who came from India. They were able to integrate very well into society, and I think if we look 100 or 200 years from now, when there is a politician that's going to be addressing them, I don't think they're going to be voting for a law that's going to, create anything like a Sharia law would. So that would be the other concern, where you can have very well-meaning, peaceful Muslim people who just want to live in peace, but at the same time, if they want to live not according to the law of the nation, but according to the law of the Quran, and if there is a politician in their neighborhood, let's say when those neighborhoods would become much more prevalent, and they would have a referendum of some sort and ask, like, hey, who wants Sharia law? And they would all raise their hands up, not because, they're bad people, but because this is the law that's that demands a lot of respect in their household. So why wouldn't they vote for it? That is a scenario that I wouldn't really want to come to pass, because I value the system of laws here in America and in Australia. I say, like, all these laws are based of older systems that guarantee a certain amount of freedom for the people who are living under this social contract, so to speak. And I don't know whether or not what I'm talking about right now would come to be or not, but I'm interested in your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so I want to stand up for the rights and values that we have, but I think they're antithetical to other cultures at this time. And as we live in a liberal world, you get a pushback simply because our values and cultural institutions and laws are so easy to abuse because they're built in freedom. And I think a lot of cultures don't really understand the concept of freedom as a concept. And so what I think they think it is they see it as a form of weakness. I think America was built out of freedom, and that's what made it strong in some certain respects. Freedom from England, freedom from government. It's a very libertarian constitution, and it created it's this sort of Misesian cyclical. The more freedom you have, the stronger your country is. But then you end up going towards an empire, and then the empire becomes over bloated, over bureaucratic, overlord, and collapse. But you have to start somewhere, and it always is born out of freedom. And this is why America, the decline of America, I mean, it hasn't even started yet in a grand scale. Like a lot of people talk about the collapse of America. America could sustain multiple civil wars while fighting other countries on its frontiers for next 100 years. And it would be okay. France did it. France did it during the Napoleonic War, during the Revolution. It had a revolution which was eating it alive, plus it was a war with every other country in Europe, and it was totally fine, and it came out bigger, better, and stronger when Napoleon took over. So, and America is much stronger than Napoleonic France. So, the only problem is what Kurt Doolittle pointed out to me is probably a little bit too over-reliant on tech. But even then, I mean, we live in an advanced age where it's quite easy to repair that tech or for the government to fix that up, unless it was some global cataclysm that wiped out, EMP'd the whole planet, where they couldn't even turn on a machine. I don't know why that wouldn't work, but it's.
Well, you could also say that something like the Roman Empire lasted until 1453.
Well, with the Byzantine
yeah.
Empire.
They called themselves the Romans. So as far as that kind of system lasting for a long time, I could see that happening. I don't know what form it's going to take, but
and if you think about it, I mean, Rome became Constantine changed it to a Christian Catholic or Christian empire, and the Holy Roman Empire still exists. So I mean, in a conceptual way. So it depends how.
There was a quote about the Holy Roman Empire that it is neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. But I see your point.
Yeah, you know what I mean, right? So, well, it's religion dominates the world still. So, I mean, that is a ripple of what happened there. So, I mean, they tried to kill the guy in Jerusalem or wherever they hung Jesus up. But, I mean, he's now dominating the world because of what happened in Rome. So, I don't know. It's very interesting. The life's very dynamic and weird. But yeah, so I think a lot of these cultures see the West as prey because of some of the strength and institutions that it has that actually work, but they're antithetical and they don't work when it's easy to colonize, or it's easy to attempt to colonize because of the freedom that's inbuilt into these systems, which is why the West looks so strong when you're in Afghanistan and you see F-35s coming over and tanks everywhere, and your country's been invaded by everyone for the last 40 years, but then you go to the West and everybody's watching football.
Yuval Noah Harari takes a very interesting and particular look at how Cortez, right, conquered the Aztecs. And it was like an elite band that was able to get in, position themselves perfectly, and then they overwhelmed the elite. And then they had the superior positioning and like didn't let everybody know they had even taken over, right? and so the elites couldn't even like cry out, because if they did, they would be decimated. And then so the way Cortez, because if they had just wiped them all out, it was just this small band, right? They would have just been swarmed, like they could have been drowned in piss by, you know, like the Aztec nation. But the thing is that they were just like positioned. They just, I forgot how the whole
They
story
took
goes,
over
but basically-
the center of power, the cultural mandala, and once they
Yes.
had that, then they just sent emissaries out and said, dictate what's going on.
Exactly. And so that was very interesting, how, like, if America was gonna ever be conquered, it would have to be something like that, right? As in the way that a virus takes over a host. Like, I was working on a short story, and I tried to imagine like the scariest monster I could imagine, and I imagined this like Leviathan swarm, like machine alien that was like consuming stars for its energy at a terrifying rate. And we could calculate, okay, in 80 years this thing is about to eat our sun. Like, it does not give a hoot about us. like our advantage is that we're like this undetectable like speck of scum on, you know, like this planet here that it's not even concerned about. It just sees the sun, right? It's just such a big thing that it's like it doesn't know that we are going to get wiped out when it eats our sun. And so I imagine the short story is people planning for 80 years, like, how are we going to adapt and like live symbiotically with this thing that's coming? Like, or do we try to like kill it? Do we try to just like live on it, like for its heat, and like try to like have a symbiotic relationship? Like, what do we do? And so the story is like this, it's like this 80-year debate. Well, half of it's like the debate of like, do we try to nuke it? Do we try to like infect it like a virus and take it over? Do we just live with it when it eats our sun? Like, what the hell do we do? And so I think that, you know, America has gone through a lot of changes, and it is a country of freedom, but I do think that it's important. You want to have stability. And I think that, you know, it's good for people to have an open heart, and, you know, because if you close up, you keep out negative experiences, but you also keep out positive experiences. And I think that some people are a little too paranoid about conquering and conquerors, but I think that it's important to keep people strong. I'm very pro Second Amendment. Right? I think that you shouldn't get rid of the guns, and I think that our indirect democracy in our electoral college actually works very well for all its problems. So I think that hopefully Cortez and his small band doesn't come over and set us up for a big snap where we all starve to death, and then they roll out the Wakanda tech for the remaining whoever.
Well, we have another Cortez right now with her own small but vocal band, who is catching the eyes of at least the younger elites, as you were talking about.
Yeah, but they're
before.
wide out in the open. They're wide out in the open.
Well, one thing that I'm curious about, and I'm curious about what you guys both think relating to this, is if we're talking about the elites, like Jules, you were talking about how a lot of them are cultural influencers. And when I take a look at the media, I try to play devil's advocate. And again, I'm not talking about the Australian situation, but as far as America, let's say we had that anti-gun protest. What happened from it? Nothing. You know, they had their time in the limelight, like we had David Hogg and the bald girl, and they went their way afterwards. So when I take a look at that, part of me thinks that there are responsible people in the elite who want to be in control of whatever crazy leftism is going on right now, not let it be something that's going to overly infect the entire process. Maybe they're being too prideful like Uncle Scar in dealing with the hyenas in Lion King, where in the end they end up eating him. I hope not. I hope that there is still a lot of control, regardless of whether we're talking about Republican elites or Democrat elites, that they do have a certain sense of, we don't want this country to go to hell in a handbasket. Like, sure, we want to extract a certain amount of resources and have a certain amount of power over others, but at the same time, keep things business as usual. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I'm very pro Second Amendment for the United States, and I'll tell you why. Because the United States, I think it legitimately is a superpower, and I think that the people being armed against that is a very important thing. It's against the government. It's not against each other. Although that's a side issue that the weapons obviously do get used against each other. But again, weapons could be used against anything. I'm not for Australia though. I think Australia's got fine gun laws as it is. I think maybe they're a little bit strict, but I don't think we're in the same scenario as you guys, because here the guns go from a strength, which they are in America, against the government, to a liability in the fact that it wouldn't take very much for I don't know, some adversary to just access those guns and hold us hostage, because there's not that many of us. Our population is really small and we're spread out over a vast territory. America is a completely different story. So yeah, I would say I'm pretty pro Second Amendment for the United States as well. Although it's a bit hard to say, because you end up, with a lot of crime and stuff, but that's a side issue. Like, it's a side story.
Problem, and we have to solve that problem. We have a mental health epidemic, and we have to. It's a reason to not. The elites want to take the guns away, right? Or people who have been filled with fear and insecurity, because otherwise, I think having a culture where everyone, or you assume 8 out of 10 people are armed, is going to be a much safer society, because you're going to be training responsibility. It's not just about being haphazard, right? It's about culture codifies behavior, society codifies behavior, right? And so if you have people who are responsible for their own sovereignty, right, it makes it very hard to conquer them, right? Because the government is supposed to work for us. We're not supposed to prostrate and submit to the government. Now, if people are popping off and going crazy, well, then we need to help each other, and we need to talk and spread information and figure out what's going on, right? Because, you just sent us this Elon Musk Neuralink video. I watched it. I loved it. So if we're cutting into brains and connecting them to robots, okay, hopefully we know a little bit about the brain and mental illness, that we can also help people overcome it, right? Because otherwise it's we have no business putting robots in our brains if we can't help people who are struggling with depression and mental illness and heal them. And I think a lot of the things that are making people go nuts, I think if you legalize prostitution, believe it or not, it might sound counterintuitive, you will solve a lot of mental illness. The mainstream media says that the incel, the involuntary celibate community, is where a lot of this festering mental illness is. And it's because they need love and hugs and compassion, and they need that stress release valve that human beings have, and it's human connection, right? And talking to people, hugs, touches, kisses, sex, all of it, those are all different degrees of human connection. If you have this involuntary celibate community that is deprived and starved of human connection and emotional release, you need to give them a legal, easy way to help manufacture their happiness. It's just so common sense to me, right? And I think the government has no business telling people like what they can do with their own body and like what you're allowed to like buy with your own money, right? Like I am a libertarian that way. Like I think we should legalize all the drugs. I think we should get rid of the FDA. I think this would help accelerate all this medical innovation. But if we're worried about mental health, legalize prostitution. I saw a documentary, I think it took place in Thailand or something, and you watch these guys in these brutal jobs. They're like smashing rocks all day, like grueling work. And you listen to them talk, and they're glowing. They're all glowing. It's like they're doing podcasting all day or something. And it's like, so what's your routine? Like, what are you guys doing all day? And they say, well, first we smash rocks like all day for 10 hours, and then we go to the brothel, and then and then all our stress goes away, and then we come back in the morning and we're smashing rocks. And it's like, well, clearly something's working for their mental health.
They're
right?
doing
Like maybe
kind of
we can incorporate that here.
They're doing a different kind of smashing in the nighttime.
So I'm very pro legalizing prostitution for the incel community. So I hope they know I'm a spiritual incel here.
And they'll get a discount. An incel discount.
Yeah, Lev and Jules. We're gonna start once it's legalized. We'll have the Lev and Jules coupons. Like just use the Lev and Jules coupon at your local brothel.
There'll be our sponsors, and I think it'll also change the dating scene as well. If people aren't just going to be in for dating just for the sex, which they could get elsewhere, they would be in it more for, let's have a more meaningful relationship and maybe, have some kids, raise a family, all that good stuff. I think people need love, and I see a lot of lonely people today, so that's the key. Love is the answer.
Well, that's fascinating. So yeah, so you're saying that there's the lack of human connection in the social media age. That's, yeah, across the board. So dating apps, social media, it's all isolating us, which is what it was supposed to not do, right? It was supposed to bring us together. It was supposed to make us all connected, and it's driven us apart. I've seen that people in the incel community have killed themselves and stuff. Didn't they have a leader? So I saw CNET or something. They did it, and the guy killed himself halfway through the documentary. But yeah.
That is terrible. Horrible. I would never, ever, ever do that. I just have too much hope for the future. I have too much optimism for the medical innovations that are coming around. And I think no matter what kind of rock bottom you hit, right, like you can emerge from it. I've had a lot of different rock bottoms. I've had a lot of moments where I felt like all was lost, and heartbreak, business things going wrong, losing lots of money, and I think that it's really important it's really important to love yourself, and I have a lot of optimism for the future. So if anything ever happens, look into it, okay? Look into it.
It's not you. It's not your. It's definitely something fishy's going on there. But that's all like these are all good character building things. This is why you guys have such a great cat channel, I think, because it takes those people who go up and down and round and round the mulberry bush to build enough character so that you mentioned at the start, you said, we get pushback from multiple angles. This person says this about the channel, this person says my hair was funny, this person said that, why are you doing this, you should give up, you had the wrong people on, politics. I mean, you get all these different pressures, all these different ideas, and it takes someone it's not the most amazing thing, but it does take someone who goes, actually, I'm going to push all that aside. I'm going to take the good parts out of it. I'm going to ignore the snarky comments. I'm going to ignore the people who don't comment at all, and who just and I'm going to take all the best and I'm going to turn it into something more positive. It does take a special type of character. Being a duo too, I think that might assist, and that's why you've got such a great channel. I really enjoy your channel.
Thank
you so much, Steele. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that we got to come on and to talk. I love your channel. You have amazing stuff. We have to feature you on our show. Yes, we would love to have you on.
Yeah, no, I liked Gennadi as well, and BJ Murphy. I want to get that guy. I actually the sound. We were mucking around at the start trying to get the sound on because I actually had Tim Cannon on. I should apologize to Tim Cannon at the start. I was going to, but yeah, we stuffed the sound up. But that guy is really cool. He's made a new agricultural product that is going to release. Basically, it's a microchip that basically just reads all the sensory data for all of the cattle and all of the agriculture that they have, and beams all the sensory data back. And
Wow.
and yeah, it's really incredible. So it's really gonna revolutionize like the health of pastoral flocks and stuff like that. Knowing where they are, knowing about all their temperatures and heart rates, what diseases they have. It's the whole kit and caboodle. It's a really sort of innovative technology. And we did a 30-minute interview, and it was really good. And then the stupid Skype software or whatever it was stuffed up, and we lost the whole thing. But Tim Cannon, I'll tell him about you guys. I'll try and get him on, because he's a cyborg. He's put chips in his arm. He's done his own. So it's like Zoltan. He's put biometric stuff in his hands, and he's really cool.
Oh, wow.
What do you think about these body hackers? You like these guys?
I'm gonna
Well,
wait just like with. Oh, go on.
The Elon Musk video, the Neuralink, that's something else. That's getting started. Wow. Wow, I'm really excited to see it. There's someone I went to school with who actually has brain implants. It's not Neuralink, but he has some kind of other, like they're regulating his emotions with like a brain to machine interface. Like they're getting him off psych meds, and he has literally his brain is connected to machines. And he went to NYU art school. He's a video game designer, and so he like posts updates on Facebook about how he's doing and how he's feeling and like what they're tinkering with. And it's like really fascinating time to be alive, and like really fascinating to be reading like in real time. But the Neuralink seems like a more refined version of that, or maybe he was like a prototype for Neuralink. I actually am pretty ignorant about what he has, but those little thin little hairs they put into your head, and see, I'm worried about the hackers, because like they connect it to Bluetooth. People are gonna hack you. They're gonna be driving you around like a remote control. You'll be like drinking water. They'll like make you like spill water all over yourself, and you like won't even know why. It'll be because like some like troll has, like made you jigger.
Well, I'm not worried as much about the hacking as I am about big governments using it to have more of a control over their population. Like when people talk about the genetic engineering that's going on in China, bringing into the world these babies that have, like a super baby type of quality, like creating an army of geniuses. I don't see that happening. I'm actually thinking that China is going to use this technology in order to create much more of a docile class of, like an underclass of people that are going to be very obedient and very robot-like. And I don't want that to happen, obviously, so that is something that we also have to watch out for, both in terms of these implants and in terms of genetic enginering.
Lev, you've hit on something.
Worlds.
Yeah, you've hit on something really important, because I've been thinking about this, and I was talking to Peter about this. I see it as the start of a divergence of humanity, where we're all starting to go separate ways in evolution. Some people are going to be, if you've ever seen the movie Gattaca, they're godchildren and biological children, and they're normal. So, and they'll just become the sort of normal class of people. You're going to get people in the upper tier of society, just like money is a differential between how people live and how people can access resources and information and knowledge, and how they can't. The internet's diffused a little bit of that now. But you're going to end up with people who are going to be able to afford to not be docile, and will get the enhancements. They won't have any diseases, and they'll be taller, fitter, smarter through genetic. And then you will get this docile class, which will basically just eat, breathe, and consume products to keep the GDP rolling. What do you guys think? Do you think we're hitting a divergence in humanity right now? This is a divergence, or do you think it's going to be a one track?
Definitely a divergence. I think you're pretty close on that one, because different people are gonna volunteer and elect for different things. Not everyone, and the way this technology is gonna roll out, it's gonna happen over time. Like you have people that are biohackers injecting CRISPR into their body now, and then you have people that will never do that. like Amish equivalents, and then you'll have people that, you know, there are people in the transhumanist community that want to like genetically engineer themselves to become dolphins or like cat people and stuff. Like they want to grow a tail and they want to do all sorts of stuff. And even though that's like way out there in terms of genetic knowledge that we need to accomplish something like that, you're gonna, just like you have people that tattoo their face or their eyeballs, or they'll put a stud in their tongue, or, you know, like people do a lot of body modification. And when you're able to modify your body at the genetic level, and as well internally with machines, I mean, the sky's the limit.
If we're not talking about a purely cosmetic approach, or even an approach that has to do with strengthening of one's body, if we're talking about there being certain things related to, I don't know, making somebody smarter than they are by having certain processes be done for them, as opposed to you using your own willpower in order to do something, that goes to the question of what exactly is the power of human willpower, as far as the things, the decisions that we are responsible for doing. As far as letting a machine or letting some kind of an algorithm do that for you, we may be crippling ourselves instead of advancing ourselves, in the sense of having a more advanced consciousness that comes from like meditation practice and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I know for myself, I definitely want my children to probably be genetically modified and not to have certain diseases and things like that. I'm definitely on board with it. I'll let you guys go. I know you got to run, so that's that. I'll let you do that. But listen, I'm going to have you back on at some point, because I want to talk about a whole raft of things we didn't even get through. This is just kind of a, hi, how you going? This is who Lev and Jules are. But I want to talk about moon and Mars colonization. I want to talk about, you know, the space race. I want to talk about, have we finished like with Earth yet? I want to talk about some of your other interviews and get into all that. How the channel's going, updates, you know, definitely more science talk as well. And also by then, we'll have more Neuralinks to talk about, because that was only just, as you said, that was only very recently that Elon's done that. And this is the consumer side. So, you know, there's that old saying, oh, imagine what the government's got. Well, the government's a terrible innovator. Sometimes they accidentally innovate because they got so much money. Yeah, like they're good at stealing tech, and they're good at stealing information. So maybe they do have some pretty cool stuff hidden back there at, I don't know, Area 51 or wherever they're hiding it.
The Black Project.
Yeah.
It's in Antarctica. We're going to Antarctica, everybody. We're going to Antarctica.
They can't
It's gonna
stop
be
us
11
all.
Jules special. It's 11 Jules special. We're going to Antarctica.
Wouldn't it be in the Arctic? Or is that too close to Russia? They're too scared of it, putting it up there. They put it all the way down in Antarctica.
It's in the hollow Earth. It's in the hollow Earth. It's in the hollow. Don't worry, everybody. It's a complicated subject. It's a complicated subject.
Jules, would you like to have a final comment about anything?
Well, I want to thank you for having us on, and everyone, please subscribe to Lev and Jules Break the Rules on YouTube. Our handle is Lev and Jules. You can find us on Facebook and on Twitter, and Lev will tell you his Twitter handle. My Twitter handle is Jules P. Hamilton. And final words, everybody, this is a great time to be alive. Stay on the internet, but also get off the internet. Read some books, do some exercise, you know, stop and smell the flowers, you know, and meet people and talk to them. And, you know, ad astra per aspera. Ad astra per aspera.
And Lev?
My Twitter handle is LevPo, LevPo, very short. And I just want to wish everybody to have a great life, get a family if possible, get people who will depend on you and you will depend on them to a certain extent, to have a mutual love and affection, and raise your kids right and all that good stuff.
All right, that's very nice final words. So again, thank you for coming on. That's really awesome of you guys. You're doing great work over there. We'll have you on again. We want to talk about a bunch of other stuff, but it's really good to have this sort of grounding introduction, and now we can roll into some of the juicier media topics at hand. So thank you so much. Thanks for coming on Detonation. Unshackled.net, make sure you get on there. And check out all more Detonation coming your way all this week. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
And come on our show. We'll see you soon.
Yeah, it'll be all in the description, don't worry.